All right, let's talk about the piano. Today, we're going to dive into a completely revolutionary way to think about practice. We're going to blend the wisdom of this cult classic book with what modern science tells us, all to help you practice smarter, not just harder.
So, have you ever hit that wall? You know the one. That super frustrating plateau where you're putting in the hours day after day, but you just don't seem to be getting any better. Well, you are definitely not alone. In fact, that feeling of being stuck, it happens to pretty much every musician out there.
We all kind of imagine progress should look like this nice, clean, steady line going up and up. But the reality, as pianist David Lane shows us, is totally different. It's usually this long, slow, kind of tedious phase where you feel like you're going nowhere. And then, all of a sudden, click. You get this huge, rapid breakthrough where it all just falls into place. The real secret is figuring out how to get to that click moment way, way faster. Okay, section 1, the practice plateau problem. So that feeling of being stuck, it isn't just in your head. It actually has a real scientific basis in how our brains build, and sometimes how they mess up, our muscle memory. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the feedback loop, which the folks at Piano Sauce explained so well. See, every single time you play something correctly, your brain creates a positive feedback loop. It makes it just a little bit easier to play it right the next time. But, and this is the dangerous part, the exact opposite is also true. Every mistake you make reinforces a negative loop, literally training your hands to make that same error again and again. So, section 2, Chang's counterintuitive method. How do we break out of that negative feedback loop? Well, this brings us to a radical, almost mythical book in the piano world. Chuan C. Chang's Fundamentals of Piano Practice. This is a book that just completely flips the script on what we think of as intuitive practice.
I mean, just listen to the book's promise, 1,000 times faster. Chang basically argued that for centuries, the most effective practice methods, the stuff that masters like Liszt and Chopin knew, were never actually written down. They were just passed down in secret, leaving generations of students to struggle. His book was his attempt to finally put it all on paper.
So, the first core idea in Chang's method is something called segmental practice. Instead of struggling through an entire piece from start to finish, you break down the hardest parts into tiny, manageable chunks. And I mean tiny. We're talking just a few notes or maybe a single measure at a time. The goal is to make the task so simple that you literally can't get it wrong.
And building on top of that, Chang was a massive advocate for practicing with your hands separately. The cycle he came up with is just genius. You practice a short part with your right hand until it just starts to get tired, and then you immediately switch to your left hand. This little cycle lets you practice intensely, 100% of the time, without ever practicing with a fatigued hand, which, by the way, is exactly when those bad habits and injuries start to form.
Okay, section 3, the science of muscle memory. Now, Chang's ideas might sound a little old school, but what's so amazing is how perfectly they line up with what modern science is telling us about how our brains actually learn motor skills. Remember that feedback loop we talked about? Well, this is how you hack it. By breaking a piece into those tiny segments and practicing hands separately, Chang's methods just drastically lower the difficulty. This makes it so much easier to get those correct repetitions in, which builds that powerful positive muscle memory loop and starves the negative one.
This leads us right to what the Piano Sauce channel calls the Goldilocks zone. For practice to actually work, it has to be challenging enough to build a new skill, but easy enough that you can do it right pretty much every time. You know, not too hard, not too easy, it has to be just right. And segmental practice is the perfect tool to find that zone for any passage you're working on.
Chang also wrote about this incredible thing he called post-practice improvement, or PPI. He noticed that the real learning often happens after you've walked away from the piano. And he was spot on. We now know this as memory consolidation. It's the process where your brain literally rewires itself and solidifies new skills, and it happens mostly while you sleep.
All right, section 4, your arm is a bridge. So efficient practice isn't just a mental game, it's also deeply physical. It's about understanding the actual physics of how your body is designed to move when you're sitting at the piano.
I just love this analogy from the instructor Denis Shadanov. He says to think of your arm as a bridge, where the main points of support are at your shoulder and your knuckles. This one simple idea completely shifts your thinking away from tense, isolated fingers to seeing your body as one connected, stable unit.
And this slide shows it perfectly, the huge difference between tension and relaxation. So many of us are taught to force our fingers into this tense, rigid curl. But Zhdanov points out that the most efficient way to play is with a natural curve, the exact same relaxed shape your hand makes when it's just hanging by your side.
It's all about transferring weight from your arm, not creating tension in your fingers.
So, last section here. Section 5, using Chang's book wisely. Now, this book is clearly a powerhouse of ideas, but it's also really dense, it can be controversial, and it's over 200 pages long. So, how should a normal person actually use it?
Well, on the one hand, the piano community absolutely reveres it. As this one Reddit user says, it's their favorite reference, packed with insights that just click the more experience you get.
But then, on the other hand, the very same user points out that for a total beginner, it can be completely overwhelming. And the consensus is pretty clear. It's a brilliant reference book on how to practice, but it's not a method book that tells you what to practice.
So let's put it all together. Here's your action plan. First, break your difficult music down into tiny, manageable segments. Master those segments with your hands separately. Always try to stay in that Goldilocks zone where you can play accurately. Think of your arm as a stable bridge, not a bunch of tense fingers. And finally, use books like Chang's as a powerful guide to supercharge your learning, but use it alongside a teacher or a standard method book.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. For centuries, we've been told that mastery just comes from putting in more and more hours. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the real secret to unlocking your potential isn't about how much you practice, but about how you practice?